Senator Rhiannon.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. By far the majority of Australians, those born here and those who come here to find a new life and opportunity, want a good education for their children, for the nation's children. The bill before us, the Higher Education and Research Amendment Bill 2014, will rob people of opportunity and hope to achieve this. It should be voted down in its entirety. There are no deals, no negotiations that can turn this bill into a winner. The Liberals and the Nationals did not even have the courage to take this bill in any form, any details of this bill, to the last election. Now they should have the decency to withdraw it. There are nearly 1 million students in Australia who will be impacted by these changes if they go through. For people without a silver spoon, education is the key to survival. It gives you a leg up and makes freedom and choice possible. Education empowers people. Prime Minister Tony Abbott's education, however, is a very different story. It's about the entitlement of a rich boy from Sydney's North Shore who takes his power for granted, is not bothered by $100,000 fees for a university degree, and about public money earmarked for higher education going to for-profit companies. By raising university fees, the Liberals and the Nationals are slamming the door on opportunity for millions of Australians. Coalition policy is about keeping the world as a place with haves and have-nots. This approach is the basis of the bill we are considering tonight, and it's why the Greens say so emphatically it should be scrapped completely. The bill is neoliberalism in its most crude form. 101 of neoliberalism is to strip the costs off government and put them on to ordinary people. The essence of this bill is to take $5 billion out of the public allocation for our universities and put the costs on students with higher fees. Minister Christopher Pyne is pushing ahead with this bill is ignoring the growing opposition to this destructive legislation. One of the lines we've heard trotted out time and again from the minister is the fact that apparently the entire university sector is behind the proposed shake-up to higher education that he is now engineering. It's clear that the minister and his coalition colleagues, Nationals as well as Liberals, have a strong preference for meeting with and discussing higher education issues with university executives and managers over staff and students. What they need to remember is the Vice-Chancellors and senior management are not the entirety of the sector. They are actually only a small part. Just last week we saw the creation of the National Alliance for Public Universities, an organisation seeking, and I quote, to give voice to the researchers, teachers, administrators and other staff who oppose the deregulation of fees and whose perspective has been overlooked in the national debate. The organisation has grown rapidly, with 500 academic staff signing up in a few days. The Charter of the National Alliance argues universities provide both public and private benefits. To fulfil these, they must function independently of market forces and political interference. They go on to say, universities have a social mission, enabling the social mobility while striving to dissolve entrenched social inequalities altogether. I congratulate them on their launch and welcome their voice in this crucial debate. These are the people who are truly representative of the university sector, along with the students, not the group of 8 Vice-Chancellors, many of whom have been camped out in the Minister's office attempting to lobby crossbenchers week after week. These people, the group of 8 Vice-Chancellors, sadly have been prioritising their ideological commitment to unrestrained markets over the needs of their staff and students. I also would like to congratulate the many students who have highlighted the damage this bill will occur. And I think at this time it's worth us remembering the courageous students who took their protest to the ABC Q&A program. They do warrant a brief mention in this debate. Some people, including a few media commentators, grumbled that these young people had bad attitude and apparently lacked respect. But most of these people, those who criticised, have a prominent voice within the public discourse on this and a range of issues. Most Australians, particularly young Australians, the ones who will be hardest hit by these measures, don't have a public voice, and the action at Q&A made a significant contribution to the debate on the Pyne Bill. Just today, I do acknowledge the interjection from Senator Mackenzie. Just today, 2 students at Melbourne University took direct action also on this issue, with a lock-on blocking the entrance of a university building. Why do people do that? Because they are so deeply troubled and concerned. These students were campaigning against the proposals contained in this bill and for free education, a realistic and affordable alternative for students. I said earlier that there are nearly 1 million students in Australia who will be impacted by these changes. 250,000 of them are on youth allowance and will have their debt significantly increased as a result of the proposal to slash start-up scholarships and replace them with loans. There are also 140,000 university staff. They are the people that we should have to the forefront of our mind when we debate this bill. On the issue of fees, this is where we see the deeply damaging aspects of this legislation. We've heard Vice-Chancellors and senior management, prominent backers of the bill, using the lack of guaranteed high levels of funding as their main line of argument in backing fee deregulation. Lobbying told by many of the Vice-Chancellors that many of the Vice-Chancellors have said that they have to support fee deregulation, as successive federal governments had inadequately funded higher education, and then they would be hit by this latest slash approach to higher education with a $5 billion cut. But this is where we actually need to look closely at what's going on here. But I also do need to say how disappointing it is how the Vice-Chancellors respond to these cuts rather than just being a strong voice out there advocating for a well-funded higher education sector. So coming on to fee deregulation. Now this might be called a competitive agenda, but it is pure and simple an extreme budget measure to shift the $5 billion the government wants to save for itself. Remember, this is a budget measure in the first instance, and to shift the cost burden onto students. By cutting student subsidies by an average of 20% by place, the government is essentially forcing all universities to raise their fees in order to retain their current level of funding. And that's what the Vice-Chancellor should be spelling out, and that's at the point where they should have been arguing. Fears of prohibitively expensive fees was set out by the Independent National Centre for Social and Economic Modelling, based at the University of Canberra. That has set this out very clearly. The NTU, the ACTU and the National University of Students also set out these issues in the submissions before the inquiry into this legislation. Now, it is worth commenting at this point of some of the comments from the coalition members, and today again Senator Mackenzie has been out there publicly accusing people who address this issue of fees and the very real issue that we have ahead of us, or the students particularly have ahead of them, of $100,000 fees, and she accuses people of scaremongering. Now, what's going on here is that myself and others who are out there informing the many, the unions, the community groups, the students, is being responsible, is informing students of the reality that they will face. And even the University of Western Australia, when they released its figures, saying, oh, it'll be $16,000 a year for a degree. But if you look at that $16,000, that very quickly, for a 5-year degree, which is increasingly common for many students, will move into the range of $100,000 once interest on student debt is included. So many of the coalition's own backers of this aspect of the legislation, when you look into what they were saying, that's where you'll get the proof that it's not scaremongering, it's reality, when you inform people of the high fee levels that they will face. Not a single witness at our inquiry agreed with the Minister's proposition that university fees will go down as a result of deregulation. Given that university vice-chancellors are viewing fee deregulation as a tool to boost revenue, it is obvious that fees will increase across the board if this bill is passed by Parliament. This is obviously so there is great interest in this issue, and it's one that when the budget first came out and we started hearing the details about the government's planned cutbacks and then the legislation comes, and there just wasn't enough information out there about what the fees could blow out to. And one of the contributions the Greens decided to make to this is that we developed a website, whatwillmydegree.cost.com.au, and the value of this site, which was just about providing information, that was all that it was doing. It received so much traffic in the first few hours of its operation it actually crashed. We quickly had it going again, and in the space of a few weeks it was viewed 1.3 million times, and over 500,000 students and future students used it to calculate the cost of their degrees until under a deregulated environment. So that highlights it's not scaremongering. The government's been irresponsible. They've been trying to sugarcoat their poisoned piece of legislation by making out it's something that it isn't. The horror story of these high levels of fees is something very serious. And while in the main the very damaging budget the government brought down hits disadvantaged people in the main, and certainly this legislation does, this bill does also reach into middle-class Australia. This is something I'm coming across more and more with middle-class families, people who are lawyers, small business people, work in the professions. I'm often with them socially, and I've had this experience. They're actually looking at their children saying, how am I going to afford to send them to university? This is becoming increasingly troubling people in our communities. Then to move on to the issue of Commonwealth-supported places. This bill, if it becomes law, public subsidies will be given to private for-profit higher education profit providers for the first time, to the tune of $450 million. And again, please focus on that. $450 million, not money that's just sitting there, money that once would have gone to our public universities. Then if the bill goes through, it would be there to help a number of companies increase their profit margins. Now, the Minister has been unable to confirm that new students will enrol in the courses at these private higher education, with these private higher education providers. Now, this is very relevant to how this money plays out. And the bill's explanatory memorandum confirms that the rate of growth in student enrolments in this area will be slower than in previous years. Now, the end result of these changes will be a windfall of $500 million, and again I say that, like nearly $500 million in subsidies to private education providers without any guarantee of increasing access. So the money set aside, the government's telling us that all these students will flood to these providers, but when you actually question the Minister, he can't confirm that more students will actually enrol, that more students will come into the system. Now, the committee, with our inquiry, heard strong evidence from the Australian Education Union regarding the problems associated with allowing private providers to access public funding for higher education. And we need to ask the question, and it needs to be answered, who is going to hold these operators to account? The experience with the vocational education and training sector shows the depth of this problem when these dodgy operators come in, and there are just too many of them there already. They can see that there's money, that it's easy pickings. They move in and move in quickly. So this is another serious worry for how this plays out. The result of opening up the vocational education and training system to the marketplace brings growing doubts to the quality of the provision, the education provision that comes from the private sector, and also the cost of qualifications for the students who may enrol. Far from the opening up of the market in the VET leading to a downward pressure on price, we now see the spectre of $30,000 being charged for diplomas and advanced diplomas in VET. Right now, at the VET system, a degree at a public university under the current system will cost less than what it costs for your technical and further education training under their system that's already been opened up to the marketplace, because the cost is being shifted on to students. Now, the bill will not require private providers to reduce their fees as a result of receiving government support. That's where we have this very serious problem with how this will play out with the private providers. The issue of Commonwealth scholarships is one that in the past week the government has been trying to use as its key argument to make out that this is such a fair system that they're bringing forward, even starting to equate it with free higher education, which was such a stretch, but nothing is beyond this minister. Firstly, no Commonwealth government funding will go into the so-called Commonwealth scholarships. Universities will be forced to increase their fees by at least 20% before a single dollar will be diverted to these scholarships. Universities like the Group of 8 will be able to maximise the increase in student fees under deregulation, and they'll have the largest pool of funds for these scholarships. Now, this will distort the university activities. Group of 8 universities have the lowest proportion of students from low SES background. The small and yes, it'll change under your system, Senator Mackenzie. And what we see here, and I'm pleased the Senator interjected at this point, because the sellout of the nationals of our regional universities is something that has to be documented and needs to be recognised. It is absolutely monumental. Minister Pyne's deception, because he has said he didn't expect fees to increase significantly under a deregulation system. But the minister can't have it both ways. Either fees will increase significantly or Commonwealth scholarships won't exist. The whole issue of the Commonwealth scholarships is something that has really been brought forward as a scam to try and justify that there is assistance there for disadvantaged students, but it will only be a small number. We don't even know the form that those scholarships will take at the moment. Each university can work it out itself, and there's no guarantee that those students who may receive a scholarship could end up with a heavy debt and a heavy cost burden at their end of their education. The issue of research is something where the government has also been so deceptive, saying that there will be no cuts to research. But in this bill, the government is proposing a 10% across-the-board cut to research training scheme. This is an enormously backward step, placing greater financial burden on our universities. And remember, this comes on top of all the cuts we've seen to the CSIRO, the cooperative research centres, and so many other key research bodies. And coming to the regional universities, again to repeat, the sellout of the nationals to our regional universities is huge. Our regional universities could possibly be the most vulnerable aspect of this bill when we come to consider the various institutions. Regional universities like the University of Wollongong and Newcastle, clearly from big areas, there's no universities that are there for them to compete with, and it really shows the whole competitive argument that so much of this bill is based on falls over when you look closely at how this works. I particularly pay tribute to the many organisations that have worked so hard to defeat this bill: the National Tertiary Education Union, the National Union of Students, those who work with postgraduate associations, the Australian Nursing and Midwifery Foundation, the ACTU, the Australian Education Union, and the Australian Medical Students Association. If the bill was passed, it would create a higher education system that was inequitable, elitist, with limited accessibility to the highest quality public education institution.